So that part is going to be key. So I'm going to really
Just want it on the MLS?
Yeah, just put it that way. So we're going to focus on a couple of quick little issues that are about it. How many have had the opportunity to fill out a REPC so far? Pretty much everybody. Okay.
For practice.
For practice, okay.
Yeah.
Dealing with with a client? Okay. Because it ends up being a little bit more real when they're asking questions of, oh my goodness, I didn't think about that. So that'll be helpful. The key thing that I want, we're going to turn off this front light so you can see it a little bit better. The key thing that normally I would spend on this first paragraph 30 minutes. Okay? And the reason for that is because there's stuff here that I don't think agents truly understand the importance of it. So I'm going to try to take that 30 minutes and condense it. And but what is this first paragraph talking about?
Buyer and relationship between buyer and agent.
Okay, so it's not buyer and agent. So it's going to identify the members of the contract, parties of the contract first off. So buyer and seller, it's going to address that.
It establishes your reference date for addenda and all those.
With a contract, part of contract laws, you need to have a start and end date. So we're addressing where we're having an offer that's going to be presented. So we're talking about terms of a contract. And then it's addressing specifically, we're talking about earnest money. Okay? Consideration, which is one of the other elements of a contract. So the reason why I'm focusing about this earnest money issue is as a licensed real estate agent, you have a governing body that is going to oversee whether you're doing the right thing or are you jeopardizing the public. Okay? If you are harm to the public, you're not going to be practicing real estate very long. If you're not harming the public, then this can be a great long career and no problem. The Division of Real Estate will look at when you're handling the public's money, that is one of the key things that they are going to determine if you or your brokerage is worthy enough to have a license. So as a real estate brokerage, when we receive earnest money, we deposit it in our trust account. The division in that trust account, they monitor that stuff. They go through audits randomly to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. There is nothing faster that will take this company down than a trust account that shows that the public's money is missing. It'll be done. So the same thing goes to you. When you're receiving earnest money, nothing is going to be more important to this issue than making sure that you're taking care of that earnest money. Why I'm addressing this piece is because I see daily agents that kind of take a cavalier approach to earnest money. You write up an offer. When you write the offer, right there in front of you, you check this box that you're presenting the earnest money with the offer, but you forget to leave a check or you don't have your checkbook with you, and so here I'll just send it in tomorrow. Okay, no big deal. I'll just go ahead and send it in the mail. I'll just go ahead and drop it off at the front desk. Agents provide this cavalier approach of just dropping the earnest money off. And the earnest money check may just have a name of the buyer, and it says $1,000 earnest money written specifically on Everest, but it doesn't say the property that it's attached to. We don't ask questions. So now I get this check. I'm like, I have no idea what this earnest money check is for. We send out an email to the agents. Hey, we received an earnest money check of $1,000 for John Smith. Is anybody working with John Smith? Well, sometimes agents don't check their emails, and so they may be working with John Smith, but they never see the email. So now we get this earnest money check that we have no idea to do anything with. So what I'm asking you guys to do is own this. This is your client. This is your transaction. And I'm a firm believer in owning the situation. So hypothetically, let's just say I have an assistant. They're a licensed assistant. They have the ability to talk to my client. They have the ability to draft contracts, all that stuff. And I tell them to fill something out. They do it, and we get it turned in. I don't review what they fill out. Turns out they filled out something incorrectly. Whose fault is that? my fault. It's my name as we go through in section 5. It's going to be my name on this contract. It's not my assistant. I don't care if I said word for word, hey, write this, that, and the other. It's my name. It's my fault. So when an earnest money comes in and they drop it off at the front desk or whatever, it's not the front desk's fault. It's not the broker's fault. It's my fault. I'm the one that's going to own it. So I'm a firm believer in take the ownership of it. Because the best part about it is when the deal's held together and the check comes in, guess whose name's on the check? It's your name on the check too. So you get the reward along with the responsibility. So the key thing about this, now I want you to understand the difference of the two different boxes that are here. So 2008?
This one is
Was this redone?
I think that one is 8.
2008?
Oh, you know what? This is
Oh, it doesn't come out page.
I'm pretty sure it is 2000.
Roughly 2008. They changed this a couple things on the addendum, on the reps, of which was the confirmation receipt of earnest money. We used to sign down here that it was a confirmation and receipt of earnest money. So this was the proof that the agent had to sign once they received the check. We didn't have the option of delivering it with the offer or afterwards. It was once you made an offer, you received it. So why do you think they made a change? It's back 2008 is when they made the change.
So if the offer doesn't get accepted, you check.
Okay, that would be convenient. But now when we're thinking, does the law look at convenience when they are creating laws? No. They look at, hey, this is what's required to form a law or whatever the law requires. I don't care if it's convenient or not. So that would be helpful. But they're now trying to take into effect, how do we make this a binding contract? And what would be the reason why, what was happening in 2008?
Everybody's money.
Okay, that's keep build off of that. That's kind of where we're going. 2008, what was going on? Oh, sorry, you're in short sales. Specifically, that's one of the key things that was happening. What do you mean by that? Okay, who can help? Why would that matter? It's a short sell. What does that?
Tons of offers out.
Okay, this is kind of where we're going with this. Were short sales quick? Are they quick? No. What happens? I represent a buyer and we make an offer. Is that offer going to be accepted quickly? The seller's going to sign it and accept it, but then what?
The bank has to access to that.
It's subject to third-party approval. And is that timely? It's not timely. They may take how long before they approve the offer?
I've seen 2 years. I've seen one that took 2 years.
Absolutely.
That's not the norm.
But they've taken that long. You can at least expect 3 months if it's the beginning stage of a short sell. 3 to 4 or 5 months is probably the norm, but yes, we have seen that one. So think about it. If you're the buyer, you write it's $300,000 home. Good earnest money for that amount might be $2,500. So here, in the old way, you had to write a check for $2,500. So one of two things either had to happen. If the buyer's got a lot of cash, they can go ahead and make a lot of offers. If they don't, they make an offer on one, and they don't even know if they're going to get the property. So they have to just sit around for 4, 5, 6 months because they don't have another $2,500 to make an offer on another property.
What's the norm? Is it 2,500?
Or there isn't a, hey, if it's a $300,000 property, here's this. What you see a lot of are $500,000 property earnest monies, and those are going to be on properties probably $250,000 or less. But there isn't a. I wish I could say, hey, if it's 10% of the asking price or 1% of the asking price is what the norm would be, but there isn't a number.
It just depends on the buyer, how much they want to offer.
Yes, but you also want to look at it from a different perspective. If I'm representing the buyer, I want to present the strongest offer possible, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to get a feel for it. I'm just here to tell you, if my buyer wanted to write $1,000 earnest money on a $300,000 property, that wouldn't be very strong. Doesn't really show very much interest.
Yeah.
So I would, as their agent, I would let them know that, hey, this is my opinion, you can certainly do what you want to do, but if it were me, I would make this more around $2,500.
Yeah.
It's just a number that seems about right. If it's a $700,000 property, you're going to be $7,500, five grand. You know, there's 1% is probably a pretty good little measurement, but it's definitely not. On $200,000 properties, I see $1,000 earnest monies all the time. So,
But I probably would say though, Rob, I think the higher the price of the property, the more you are gonna see a 1%. That's probably the way to
Correct.
say it is.
you're getting $1 million property, seeing a $20,000 earnest money is not uncommon. They have it because they're planning on doing that as a down payment anyway. They've got the cap. It's just not uncommon. So, what were we talking about before?
The difference between the two, why would you choose the first?
Why would you choose one? Yes, I want to present a stronger offer. So the key part about it is first off, there is no right or wrong answer. You can check either box, and it doesn't mean that your offer is wrong or incorrect. But I want you to think of who you represent. When you're writing up a REPC, who do you typically represent?
The buyer.
The buyer, right? So a seller, especially in today's market, they're receiving multiple offers typically. You want to make your offer as strong as possible, right? So if I'm the seller and I'm just looking at a piece of paper, what would be evidence of a stronger offer? I've received earnest money, or I'm going to receive earnest money later on. I've received it. I've already received it. It's splitting hairs, but we're just looking at it piece of paper wise. What is a stronger offer? So it's my opinion is if I'm doing a traditional sell, this is what I typically do. If I'm doing a traditional sell, I'm going to collect earnest money with my offer. Okay? So I'm not waiting on the bank and all that stuff. That's just because now if I'm presenting an offer, I want to make it as strong as possible. Well, receiving the earnest money is as strong as possible. If my client lives in Logan, for whatever reason, they're looking at homes down here, their checkbook, they don't have cashier's check. When we're writing up an offer today, I probably can't do that. So I'm going to have to probably go this route. But as a general statement, if it's a traditional sell, I want to receive the earnest money with the offer. And then if it's a short sell, that's when I take this approach.
So if you take that approach and then it asks for the signature.
So, and that's where we're going to get. We're going to get to on this point. So I just want to, let's go little by little what is being done here. That makes sense, right? Okay? Now this is the part that we're going to get into that I promise you. Agents that have been in the business for 15 years are going to argue the fact that what I'm going to tell you is incorrect. And I'm going to even share with you, I was at the Salt Lake convention last year in San Diego, or this year in San Diego, and this part came up, and I said what the answer was, and I was like, wrong, wrong! There's an attorney up on the stand that he had never read the information, and he's like, yeah, I think it's more of this answer. I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys are wrong. So I bit my tongue for the right time, went and talked to the attorney afterwards, hey, I might be incorrect, this is the way I'm looking at it. Sure enough, he reads it, you're right. Then I also verified it with the Salt Lake board attorneys. Hey, making sure I'm not incorrect here. Nope, you're right. Will you please convey this across to our agents here because they've been given misinformation. So I give you that little information because you're going to have people that are going to tell you you're wrong, and I promise you you're not. All right? Let's read this. There are timetables, 2 different timetables when earnest money is required to be deposited into the trust account and received.
You can pull up that screen and then write on the whiteboard.
Well,
We'll just go right on the side.
I thought you were going to say you just write on the
Just right here. Okay.
I'm a former teacher, so that's what I do.
That's what all right. So let's focus first on this option here. If the earnest money is being delivered with the offer. The next part says, Robert is being delivered with the offer, agrees to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance the earnest money in the amount of whatever, okay? Let's read that one more time. The property described below and delivers to the buyer's brokerage with this offer, so now we have to skip that part, agrees to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance the earnest money in the amount of $1,000. So, earnest money has to be delivered to the brokerage when?
Right now,
Depends on what you select, right?
It is. We're going to focus on this one first.
oh, right now, delivered.
Okay? Do you see where the confusion comes from because of the way the wordage? They put 2 little dots here that changes a little bit of the language. If you're receiving it, delivers to the buyer's brokerage with this offer, when have you received it? You received it now, right? Okay. So this, see how that part just disappeared? So you don't have to focus on that part, right? So, with offer, 4 calendar days after acceptance. Okay, so let's just come down here for a second. After acceptance of the REPC, buyer and seller, and receipt of the earnest money by the broker shall have 4 calendar days to deposit the earnest money into the trust account. So 2 things have to happen before that clock starts ticking. What are the 2 things?
Offer accepted.
Acceptance offer.
The acceptance of the offer by buyer and seller, and what?
Receipt of earnest money by the brokerage.
That's correct. So those 2 things have to happen. Well, when we check this box, one of those things have happened, right?
Receipt.
Now we're waiting for what to happen?
Acceptance.
The acceptance. So once that acceptance happens, this clock starts ticking. Where the earnest money has got to be deposited into the brokerage's trust account. Not received by you, because you've already received it. It's got to be deposited into the trust account. So we're business hours, basically, right? Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, until 5 o'clock. So if you come in at 6 o'clock on that business day, are you going to be able to get that deposited into our? No. So Russ comes to me and just say, hey Rob, here you go. By the 4th calendar day, it's $4.59, here you go. Is that going to be a little difficult for us to get that deposited into our trust account? Yes. So even though he made his portion he got it to us, but we still haven't got it deposited. So where I'm going with this is, give us a little bit of time. So when you receive the earnest money, and you now have it accepted, that's when you turn it into the brokerage.
So you wait till it's
Absolutely. Because think about it. Who's responsible for everything? You, the agent. So if you turn this earnest money over to a property that hasn't even gotten under contract, what am I supposed to do with your earnest money? I don't know where I'm supposed to put this. And they now accept another offer. When you come, where's my earnest money check? What earnest money check? I don't have any proof to. I mean, there's nothing that I can attach it to. So you hold on to that earnest money until you have an accepted offer. Once it's accepted, now you're turning it into the brokerage.
So it's very different than my stuff at Stringham, but I only did the online portion.
Okay?
And you didn't.
Well, I promise you, they are not going into the depth that is here.
No.
I guarantee it.
They're not.
It is not. This is something that I know they're not going through.
And as far as defining 4 days, day 1 is the day after.
It's right here. After acceptance.
Right.
It spells it out for you. Yes, that is correct. We're going to move on to the next portion. So how many days after you receive it do you have before it has to be deposited into the trust account?
4 days. How many does it take?
Or what? Big difference. Calendar days versus not business calendar days. So Saturday, you get it on a Friday, it's accepted on Friday. Day 1 is Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday by 5 o'clock, we have to have it deposited into the trust account. Okay? Is that clear?
If it was
Yeah.
accepted.
Once it's
Yeah,
accepted. If you're going back and forth, counter for 2 weeks, and you've had possession of the check for 2 weeks, great. No problem. But once it gets accepted, the clock starts ticking. Are we clear on that one? Because I promise you we're going to put a little wrench in this next one.
That's the second one.
That's with the offer. That's first box. Everything we talked about is first box.
Okay, we haven't talked about.
We haven't talked about the next one.
Okay.
Because I promise you, that's why I want to make sure you're clear. This is the part, this next one is what's going to throw a little bit of a wrench. Are we clear with that?
You have it, but you don't put it in until the offer is
You don't
accepted.
get
Accepted.
it for
So
it.
just-
I
Did
thought we
you
were talking
ever
about
have any
multiple
clarification? Like,
Sorry.
okay, well, read it. After acceptance of the REPC. Remember, these are the two issues, the two conditions. I have to have it accepted by buyer and seller, and the brokerage had to have received the earnest money. Well, here, the brokerage hasn't received it because you haven't turned it in, but you have possession of it. You have the earnest money. So one of those elements is now done. Well, now you're only waiting for the next element. Acceptance of the offer. Boom, those two things have happened. Okay? So we're clear. Please, if you're not clear about this one, tell me now, because you're going to get more confused if you're not. Okay, I'll take that as you are. All right. So now you decide to put a little bit of a wrench in the arm, and you're going to accept it 4 calendar days after what?
Accepted.
Okay. So Russ is my buyer. We make an offer. It's a Thursday. It gets accepted tomorrow. And we check this box. So he has at a maximum of 4 calendar days after it gets accepted. So it got accepted tomorrow. So we're saying Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. He has to what?
Deposit.
Deposit at that
Deposit in the brokerage.
Nope.
No, that's
Or
receive.
receive from the buyer.
Yes,
He has to
what
do
they
what?
should deliver it, right?
Deliver what? Okay. Exactly. So here's the difference here. We're checking box number 2. Probably below the buyer agrees to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance. Earnest money in the amount of $1,000. Now this line comes into play because we checked this box. Okay?
Okay, so once the buyer accepted it, they have 4 days to deliver the check to you. And
Correct.
then you have 4 days
Look
to
at
deliver it to the brokerage.
That's the difference.
Okay.
Close.
Close.
Very
Very close.
Yes.
Very close.
Deposit it, yeah, because you have to do it
Okay.
paid for really.
What she said is correct.
So once it gets accepted, you actually have to go after the buyer to get the earnest money to deliver it, right? In other
So,
words, you got time to get
here,
the earnest money
Let's just,
and deliver it.
on this one, you've got 4 calendar days to get it, to complete the process. But you only have to deposit, right? That's all you have on this first one.
Yeah.
This one, you have up to how many days?
8
Now,
or
the
7.
key words though that you
Up.
just said is up to.
Up
It
to.
doesn't
Up
mean you
to.
automatically
So
get it.
basically, it's 4 days after.
Yeah.
That's where you're leaving. So, that's where I'm going to go with this. Is
Oh.
we get accepted when? I said we got accepted tomorrow, Friday,
Yeah.
and he delivers to me the earnest money on Saturday. So he's now delivered the earnest money. It just says no later than 4 calendar days. And this says upon acceptance and receipt, you have 4 calendar days to deposit. So if he delivered it to me on Saturday, then I would have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to get it deposited. So in that case, I would have had 5 calendars that got accepted on Friday. I would have had Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 5 calendar days to actually receive it and get it deposited. Does that make sense?
From the day of the
Clear.
Correct. So we're talking about 2 different dates on when this stuff can be received.
Box.
The clocks are different based on what you check. And why I'm going through this, trust me, for a while I never told anybody this stuff. I just said you have 4 calendar days to get it deposited. Well, they're like, well, my client never gave me the money. I'm past, my contract's passed. Not necessarily. We're not there yet. But I want you guys to understand it because when you make an offer, and this is a real-time situation. Russ gives me the check on Saturday. I put the check in my pocket. Well, I'm having activities with my family all weekend, had a great time, and get back to the office. And really, I'm physically at the office, but mentally I'm not at the office till Thursday. Thursday comes around, I'm like, somebody asked me for the $20 that I owe them. Oh yeah, I pull the $20 and I see this check from Russ Orchard for earnest money. Ah, crap. Okay, oh, I better get that deposited right now. So I deposited Thursday, Friday. Well, I've put my client in a situation where he's breached the contract. Now let's just say the seller receives an offer that is $10,000 more than my client's. They're looking for a way to cancel their deal. So they want verification that we deposit the earnest money by the deadline. What am I going to be showing them? We're late. So now because of my stupidity, my client is in default. Not only will the seller be able to cancel the contract, but the $2,500 earnest money that they now deposited is at risk. That earnest money would be then owed to the seller if they chose that one of the first of the options that are there. So it's now just cost me $2,500 for that vacation, that great trip that I had on the weekend, whatever. Okay?
Just keep with you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so on that second option, if I have 4 days to deliver it, I deliver it to you on the 4th day. That means you have another 4 days to put in
So you check box number 2,
the, yeah.
you have 4 days to receive it. You have 4 days to receive it. And then you deliver it to, if you delivered it to me on day 1,
Okay.
if you deliver, whenever you receive it, let's just say on day 1 of the 4 that I had to deposit, you delivered it to me. Well, I still have those 4 days to get it deposited.
Okay.
The clock doesn't shorten here. But please do that because, my goodness, we may have so much stuff that we're doing to get it deposited. The more time you give us, the better. So just be mindful of that. And I promise you, majority of the agents, and I'm talking like 80% of the agents, have no idea that that is correct. They're going to say, no, you've got 4 days, you have to have it deposited. No, you don't. Okay, is that clear? Okay, now we're going to, I obviously didn't meet my 30-minute requirement in this, but it's important. So you asked the question about signing this, okay? There's 2 different things when it comes to signing this. It says sign when what? Signature above acknowledges receipt of earnest money. So when do you sign this?
And you have to receive.
Only if
Okay, so someone's been teaching,
Russ.
Russ has been teaching something, you've spoiled my thunder. Okay, but that's okay, that's a good thing. Why do you only check this if box number 1's checked?
Number 2, you haven't received it.
Okay, but so 4 days later I'm going to receive it.
You're gonna change your contract, or not
Sorry.
signed.
There's a form, the confirmation receipt of earnest.
Okay, well you just saved some time. Great!
Yeah, see, it was okay. I knew I
That's-
was gonna be late.
This is,
If it's online, how are you gonna sign it?
it's online.
If you fill this
you
online.
can't
Oh,
alter
you
a
don't.
contract,
Yeah.
it's already been accepted.
There's a.
I'm gonna-
Basically,
Okay.
It's an addendum.
But you're talking about if I'm filling it online, I'm gonna
Yeah.
fill it online and then we have to either print it or we have to do electronic signatures to another party. I would electronically sign my signature at the time if I received it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if it's done electronically. Bottom line is, you're correct.
you're not
If you're
signing.
checking this box before it's been fully executed, your buyer is the one that signed it. That's if you receive the check, that's when you're gonna sign this box. If you send it to the seller, they then sign it, and now you are supposed to receive your earnest money. You leave this blank. There is a totally separate form. It's confirmation receipt of earnest money. That's what you fill out. That the buyer signs and the other party signs. And you're going to have agents going to say, hey, I need you to sign page 1 of the REPC. No, you don't. They've been in the business for 15 years, 20 years, and this is the way they've always done it. It happens so often that the division will accept you doing this because it's like, rather than educate people about what they should do, let's just adjust the rule so that people can't figure stuff out. So, anyway, you leave a blank. And you're going to have people that are going to get into an argument. no doubt about it.
But there's a date right there. So I guess it doesn't really matter because if you sign and then you date it, right?
It does matter. The reason why it matters is
You already have an
you are
executed
changing a fully executed document.
Okay.
And that's what you just, that's contract law. This is the part that, I'm not an attorney, first off. Let's make sure that we're clear about this. I'm not an attorney, but that is contract law that's being
But you
discussed.
did stay in the Holiday Inn.
I did stay in Holiday Inn, that is correct. And I, and going to, what is the other one, the MasterCard commercial? I just spent all my entire life on stuff, but watching my daughter go do something else is priceless. Paid, mortgaged my house to let her go on vacation, but the smile is priceless. I don't know about that. So, yes, that's the reason why you're not supposed to do it. Here we are, real estate agents that don't have a law degree, and we're filling out contracts. I mean, that in itself doesn't make sense, right? So, anyway, so that's where it is. Okay, now that I'm already 30 minutes behind, we're going to blow through stuff a little bit faster. Okay, well, are we good on this section? Okay, very important. I promise you, that is very critical. And you are already better than most of the agents that are out there because they have no idea what we just did. Filling out the information. Property, you're going to put your address here, but it'll also described as what?
Tax ID.
Tax ID number.
Oh, so you do put the tax ID number in the second one?
That's what I would do.
But it's not as big.
It's not, again, it's not required. I mean, I've had somebody put a legal description that was there. Okay, great. Now only 5 people in the valley know what that legal description is.
There must be somebody at Stream or somewhere teaching, because I've been hearing more and more, and I think this may be where people's kind of going, is to putting the tax ID number
Up
at the top
here
and
and putting the address here.
Yeah.
I have heard that as well, and it's probably that agent teaches it this way.
Yeah, I don't know.
And is it going to be wrong?
No.
It's not, but I would look at it as, okay, you and I are the normal person. What do we typically see? Are you going and telling a person, hey, you live at 27-1072? Oh, but that's also described as 152-7, Cresto Circle.
But I think what it is, what Pete was just saying, I think it's because you've got city up here and stuff, that's what they're thinking.
That could be the case.
But typically, you're gonna be better putting it.
But
And
see,
sometimes addresses can be wrong, the street address.
it expands.
Yeah.
It
Oh, it does?
completely expands.
Oh, okay.
You don't have a limited space. You can type forever, and then it'll fill in the box.
Oh, I see.
Just a quick question, so you can select second option and then receive the money on that day and then just wait to deliver it after acceptance.
You're back up here again?
Yeah.
So say the question.
Select second
You
option.
could-
Select second option and let's say your buyer just gives you the money. Do that.
You can,
You
but
do that,
uh,
just wait, but then it's obviously
you've made in my opinion, you've got a weaker offer.
Yeah.
So that's what I want you to be mindful of, is how do I make my offer as strong as possible?
Because if you do what you just said, if you check that agrees to get 4 calendar
You
days
don't
after,
have this anymore because you've already received it.
yeah, you really it really is the exact same.
That's the
But to the seller, it doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
But because you still only have 4 days once it's accepted.
Once it's
Oh,
been
I
once
see.
it's been
I
received.
see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you're not helping yourself. You're hurting your offer by doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, I see that. It's a stronger offer, obviously, once you
Exactly.
have the money
Right.
right away. Yeah.
But you asked, can you do it? You can.
Yeah.
Just I don't see why you'd want to.
Okay, I see that.
So it's the way I would phrase it. Offer there, also described as the tax ID, because this is saying in the city of, whatever it's just find that. Okay. Take the time and go through the included items. Just be aware of the stuff that's included, because they're thinking, light fixtures and bulbs. You're going to have a seller that is going to want to take everything.
Nowadays, especially because of the, I just went to a class, the Wi-Fi lights. These-
Oh, you mean the wireless?
Yeah, the ones that are attached to your Wi-Fi that you can do with your phone and this. and
There's
Oh,
that.
yeah.
You have
that's
to have
become
those
been-
on as
So now you're talking about where these openers accompany transmitters and security systems, because I had this exact same thing occur where a Vivint system, right? It's part of the security system. You can tie your front door, your dimming lights, all of these other little receivers to that to that stuff. And so the argument is, well, wait a minute, that's personal property. Well, this specifically talks about alarm systems and your garage door openers. It doesn't say the wireless stuff. I have them in my home where I had to, it cost me, I had an electrician come out. We switched down the switch. The switch is itself about $50 a piece. The cost of the electrician to come out. So it cost me $150 to get a couple of switches out that I can now on my phone turn my lights on and off in my house. That would be, it's hardwired into it. I would say that's included. Now, I can specifically exclude the stuff, but with that, there's a separate little router, a little box that is attached to those things. Would that be included? I would say no, it's not. Because I can take that with me and I can reassign a new light switch to it. But because I've connected them, people are thinking, wait, no, that's all personal property. No.
It's just like the new TVs that mount to the wall.
These are all the gray areas, the stuff that's come up.
So
The
it's
contracts
important.
don't specify a lot of those things.
I think what I would do is just walk around the house with the homeowners.
Is this included or excluded?
Yes, because you forget. I know sometimes when I was selling my homes, I would forget, oh no, I was gonna take that with me.
Right.
You know?
So that's where I'm going with this, is your buyer gonna want all that stuff? Of course they are.
Yeah.
Does the seller wanna get rid of it? Probably not. So, but the contract is what's going to be the binding piece. But if the seller takes the TV after anyway, even though he said it's part of the contract, now you gotta go track the seller down. So people are like, well, the contract says it, I'm not gonna worry about it. Okay, fine, the contract says it, but if the seller still doesn't abide by the contract, your buyer now has to sue the seller to perform what was there. Is that worth it, or just get
No,
it
it's
resolved
not.
before?
We had the same, we bought a house in Brisbane and I loved the drapes. It was like, we had these 3 sliding glass doors and the drapes were really lovely and it said included drapes on the contract. But she walked out these ugly blue striped ones and I said to my husband, I go, David, those drapes didn't come with the house. You know, they
So this is the
swapped
part where
it.
you're going, unless excluded herein, this sale includes the following items if
Yeah.
presently owned and in place in the property.
Yeah, but we didn't bother chasing out because she
Right.
was a little bit.
We've had that as well. People try to switch out refrigerators. Oh,
Yeah.
I left your refrigerator. No, it's not the one that was presently in place.
Yes,
A
yes.
water softener that was rented. It's not owned. So now the buyer thinks they're getting a water softener.
Yeah.
It's not owned. So they wouldn't get that.
You have to point that out to the
All those
buyer.
things you gotta be aware of, so just like, hey, ask questions. So it's better to ask the question up front. Hey, I noticed there's a water softener, you got it included. Do they own that water softener? No, they're renting it. Okay, well, let's exclude that then from the contract because you don't want to argue.
Yeah.
Our job is to make the
Clear
transaction smooth. And people, it just boggles my mind, well, I don't want to have that conversation right now. I want to wait till it's passed so we can have an argument.
No, you can't.
You can have the argument, but your client still may never, you have to sue the party to perform, and if they've gone across country, good luck. You're not going to get it anyway. Just resolve the problem with it. Scroll down. Okay. Again, Russ is my buyer. What's your name?
Natalie.
Natalie. You represent the seller.
Mm-hmm.
Your seller has 2 water shares that they would like, they're willing to sell, but if the buyer doesn't want to pay for them, then you're not going to include them. Okay? Russ is my buyer, and what is he going to want? He's going to want the water shares, right? So I want to write up the offer that is going to include the water shares. So do I put 2 water shares here?
Well, is it
I
the
wanna include
personal
it.
properties?
Just say the property, just include all the water rights.
No, it's.
So do I add 2 water shares or do I leave it blank?
That as is includes all the water shares. If you want to exclude them, then you.
Okay, so if I'm representing Russ, I would have left it blank, right? So if you're representing the seller, and you saw that this was left blank and there's 2 water shares that should be excluded, you would want to counter our offer and say the 2 water shares are going to be excluded from this transaction.
Yeah.
Because I left it blank, people get confused, like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know there was, of course, I'm representing the buyer, I want to get the water shares as much as available.
Yeah.
The sellers, what you want to be careful of. I mean, we've had one of our own agents, that is a real example. The seller said, hey, I'm not including the water, they didn't want to sell them at all. I'm not selling water shares. Well, they were $2,500 a share, and I think there were 4 of them.
Wow.
So it was like a $12,000 commission, and 10 of it went to go buy water shares.
Oh.
So our agent made $2,000 on the transaction. It screwed up. Okay? You know the difference between settlement and closing? What's settlement?
Sign the paperwork.
Pretty much, basically the signing of the paperwork. You're bringing the remaining part of your balance. So, $200,000 property, you got $1,000 earnest money. Let's just keep it simple. It's a $100,000 property. You got $1,000 earnest money. It's a 95 to 5% loan to ratio. So you're going to be borrowing $95,000. You need $5,000 as a down payment. You've got $1,000 earnest money already. So how much more do you need to bring in closing? $4,000. The 4 plus the $1,000 equals the 5% down payment. So settlement, you're going and signing paperwork, and you're bringing your $4,000 cashier's check. You've already got the $1,000. Yeah, but that's still being brought in. When you're signing the paperwork, that money has to show that it's hit the title company's account for that to happen. Closing is when the bank sent wires over the $95,000, and all the liens and everything have been removed, title has been taken care of, and it's now been recorded. So those are the 2 different languages that you're going to be using. Section 24 of the REPC says when settlement is going to occur. That's the date that you have to go sign. Well, the full transaction has to be completed within 4 calendar days after settlement. That's when closing has to take place. We'll get there in a second, but just I want you to understand the difference between the two statements. Everyone know what a special assessment is? What is it?
That can be either in 2 categories. It's like a condo, the HOA does an assessment, upgrading things, or it can be by the city, like changing sidewalks or something.
Okay. Normally, you're going to see it with the HOAs. So what you're talking about, you belong to an association, and they say, you know what? Our cars keep getting broken into because it's dark outside. We need to have exterior lighting put in the neighborhood, in the whole complex. It's a 100-unit complex, and the cost is going to be $10,000. Okay, so at that point, $30,000, and each unit gets assessed with a $3,000 special assessment. The whole unit has to go on and vote. And as long as they get 51% of agreement to approve it, then the other 49% have no choice. They've got to still contribute that $3,000. Whether you like it or not, that's what you have to do. And if you don't pay it, it's going to be tacked on to your a judgment's going to be issued on your property, and they can foreclose. I mean, if it's not paid, if there's a date that's on it, all of that stuff can happen. So you as the homeowner are obligated to pay it. So what this is asking, where Russ is the buyer, and Pete, you're now the seller, this was just voted on last month, it's now approved, the lights are going to go in 30 days, you're not going to be in the property to benefit from the lights, so do you want to pay the $3,000? Of course you don't. And your argument is going to be, well, hey, I'm not going to be able to appreciate it. Now, Russ's argument is going to be, well, I wasn't able to vote on it. I wasn't one of the homeowners to take a decision one way or another, so it's not my responsibility. You're the one that voted on it, so you should be the one that's going to pay for it, right? Both of them have a valid argument. Doesn't matter. It's just, what do you guys decide? Of course, the buyer is always going to want the seller to pay for it, and so when I fill out the offers, unless it's addressed up front, I'm always going to say seller to pay for the special assessments. They may come back and say, hey, buyer pay for it, or it's going to be split equally. Okay?
And is there a specific date? Is it settlement Also,
It'll be done
prior to settlement.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you always just say seller.
I do, because I'm representing the buyer.
Yeah.
Now, but if I knew in advance, that, hey, just so you know, there is a special assessment on the property, it's $3,000. The seller is only gonna pay $1,500 on any offer that they received. But what about if I increase the offer by $1,500? Because I don't have the cash up front. Okay, in that case, the seller will pay the $3,000 if you offer us that $1,500 more. I mean, there's ways to handle it, but if they basically say, they tell me in advance, then in that case, I'm gonna adjust what it is, but normally they don't.
And then if it is approved after the transaction, there's no debate. Because it has to do with approved before settlement.
Yeah.
Correct.
But if it happens a month later, there's no.
The new seller, the new seller's done.
Yeah.
Or the old seller's out of the property.
Even if they're just, they already know they're going into a meeting about this.
Yeah. It's once on approval. Okay? Let's just talk about any the fees and stuff that are there. You can look through that. We'll talk about closing. Possession. We'll just briefly talk about possession. So, this just talks about when they're going to receive the home. Again, our job is to make the transaction as smooth as possible, right? Of course, I want the best thing for my client, and the offer that we make on a property, let's just say the home is occupied. When does my buyer want the home? I don't even have to ask them the question. When do they want possession of the home?
After the sign.
Right at closing, they want it to be signed, probably too. They want it right here. If I pay, where's my keys? I mean, that's when they want it. But when can they? Once it's closed, that's when the keys are there. That's when they want the home, right? Well, is it possible the seller still just needs time to get out of the house?
Yeah.
Because if you represent the seller, is it possible that the seller had a previous under contract, and I actually am dealing with one of these sellers, that this exact same thing happened, where they went all the way to the closing, settlement deadline, they moved out of the house, settled, and the buyer never performed. Buyer's in breach, sellers moved everything out of the house, and now the buyer doesn't perform. The seller ended up moving stuff back into the home. So now we're under contract with them. Are they a little bit hesitant to want to move out before? Well, my particular client in this case, they don't, it's a corporate transaction, they do not allow possession after closing has occurred. So how we've had to do everything, we've had to increase earnest monies, we've had to remove all of our contingencies. So basically, it shows that if we did not perform, the seller would profit from that inconvenience. But we've had to adjust things because of the seller's experience. That isn't normal, but it is possible that it can happen. So if Russ is my client and he wants to get in right at closing, I'd say, hey Russ, time out for a second. Let's just understand a little bit. Knowing that the seller is still going to need some time to get out of the house, because there's a chance they may not want to be completely out until they know that this is actually funded and recorded, right? Okay, yeah, so they've asked for 48 hours after recording to be on the property. That is a pretty reasonable request. Anything, you'll see 24, 48, or 72. Those are all pretty reasonable requests. So if I'm representing the buyer, I know where I'm going with this is, and I know the home's occupied. Of course I know that he wants it upon closing, but I'm just going to save the argument, and I can either ask the seller beforehand, hey, when does your client think they can be out of the house? Oh, they're almost moving out now. They're going to be out 2 or 3 days before closing. Oh, okay, great. So we can have it at closing? Yes. They've got a lot of stuff. They're not going to start moving until, so we're at a minimum, we got 72 hours that we're asking after closing. Okay, great. Now I know the information. Let's make it work. Because the one thing that I promise happens is I'm going to be the best agent. My client's going to know that I'm looking after their interests. I'm going to just check this box. And Pete, is a good agent, but he just forgot to look at this piece of the transaction and go over it with his client because they were mostly concerned about the dollar amount. That's what their client kept talking about. Money, 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 money. So they accept our offer. Now they're bound to get out of here at closing. Yes, I got everything that my client wants, I'm the real deal. And we're coming out upon closing, and I keep telling Pete, hey, so Pete, just want to make sure, I'm looking at your client, we're supposed to settle tomorrow, and your clients haven't moved anything out yet. Well, they have 3 days after closing to move out. No, they don't. They have at closing. It's going to fund and record tomorrow. Oh, now a problem occurs. Hey, contract says. Well, now, I don't care what the contract says, the seller's not going to be out by Friday, by tomorrow. And now, my client's ticked off because the seller didn't, I know, that agent, he just obviously, their client, they're horrible, blah, 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 that gets stated. And, but I protected my client, he still can't get moved in the property, now he's calling me left and right, are they out of the house yet? No, they're still not, I'm still trying to, well, let's call the police, they're trespassing on my property. I've heard it all. I mean, we've got, my friend's a sheriff. We can get him on the sheriff, we can get evicted out of the house. I mean, you can't. You got to go through the courts, get an eviction. I mean, it's a 2-week process to go through the courts to have it done. So what I'm talking about is a skill set that we teach. It's about future pacing. I know the problems that are going to happen. So rather than wait till I get to the problem, let's address it up front. And if I tell my client, hey, the good news is if they're asking for 72 hours, but if they're out at closing, you got the keys. You can possession. You can take home. But if not, they've already asked up to 3 days, up to 72 hours. Does that make sense?
Do you think calling and just talking with the agent probably form a better relationship? Asking these types of things.
Yeah, if they're things that are important. I mean, I'm not saying you have to ask them about every single detail, but there's some things that stand out. And if I were to call back, hey Pete, we know that there's multiple offers are probably going on, or my clients are really interested in the home, we want to present the best offer possible for you. Aside from price, what are some things that are my client has some flexibility. What are the things that are most important to your client? Well, they need 2 extra weeks to stay, they need 45 days to close. Okay, so settlement deadline is very important to your client. Absolutely, they can't do anything beyond. Okay, great. Now I know that I'm going to have a 45-day settlement deadline. And all the other offers, they're going to probably have 30 days. So does my offer look better than the other? Absolutely. Doesn't mean that you can't work those other ones out, but right now it's been presented. It already meets the client's requirement. So
And sometimes it could be earlier, like when we were moving from Australia to here, the buyer of our home, we were like, we just wanted to leave. You know, we had 30 days, but then they go, oh, we got our money earlier. Can we close her 2 weeks
they're looking,
early?
hey, we want a cash transaction and we want to be done in 2 weeks if it's possible.
Yeah.
That's exactly what
And
my
we go,
client would do.
okay, that's
Perfect.
fine.
So if I bring you a cash buyer, then we close in 10 days. Is that something that your clients
That's what
would
we
do?
did here too.
Absolutely. We'd sign that today. Okay, great. So you're just asking information. Section 5, part that is also confusing. This is talking about what? Agency. Is it talking about that you have agency? Is it talking about that you are disclosing agency right now? What's it doing?
Who's representing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I represent Russ. We're Century 21. Pete, you represent another buyer, and you're with ABC Realty. So has agency been disclosed at this point?
Not yet. Because you haven't described. Well, yes, I'm sorry.
You just tick the
So you've already established agency with other documents. This is just confirmation of what those documents say.
Okay, that's the answer. This isn't confirming the agency exists. This is confirming that agency has been, this is a confirmation that it's been previously disclosed. State law requires agency to be addressed prior to any written agreement. So if I'm listing a home, before I can have a contract to list their property, agency has to be discussed. Mr. Seller, in order for me to sell your property, market, and expose it, and before I can do any of that, sign a written. I've got to show that we represent you. Okay, great. Our listing contract addresses agency in that listing contract. Okay, well, the buyer, how many of you have looked at homes before and you never signed a buyer broker agreement. Okay? Did you work with that same agent did you make an offer at some point?
When we made the offer is when we signed the.
Okay, so this is the part that is gray, where the language says, prior to any written agreement, agency has to be discussed. But it also goes in through a description of when we represent a client, agency has to be addressed. Well, is it a fair argument for me to say that if I'm showing you homes, I'm acting as your agent? It is. I'm taking the actions of what a real estate agent would be doing. So therefore, it's an implied agency at that point. If I'm taking that action, wouldn't it make sense that we should have something in writing to address that? Well, the client feels differently. I don't feel like I just asked him to open the house. I thought he was representing the seller, and I don't want any representation. So there's this gray area. But when a contract is coming together, it makes it a little bit more clear when something has to occur. So that's when the buyer broker, at the last moment, without a doubt, it has to be done.
That was the first one we filled before.
Now they've met the legal requirement to the last. It's gray, but at least that's what they have met the requirement.
So if you know, get on a dot loop and I'm working with somebody, here's your perfect house, great. Now I'm going to send you the buyer broker agreement and the
REPC.
and that's okay to just go through and do those.
I send them all together.
Okay.
Do I want to put the buyer broker first? Yes, but if
But there's not an
they
issue
sign.
as far as the date and stuff, it's just
Now we're talking electronic signatures, so this is where we're talking contract law. So if you sign the REPC before you sign the buyer broker agreement, technically, are you violating state law? You are.
Yes, you're not.
Now, is the division going to come up and they see the timestamp of 102 that the REPC was signed and 103 the buyer broker was signed? Are they going to say, you violated state law, we're taking, here's a penalty? I have never seen it. Is it possible they could? They could. I'm not as anal as I probably am. I'm not going to tell somebody.
It can come into fruition
If there's a whole things that a lot of
if
things are piled up,
someone doesn't want to pay.
and they're looking for, well, it's not a binding element from, is the contract valid or anything? It's the agent would be violating state law. It's not affecting the buyer-seller contract value.
So I had this the other day, a selling agent with a realtor. I just became a realtor. I had my sister sign the buyer broker agreement. Talking with him, he said, "Oh, I've been out here since for 2 months, but I have the documentation." That's all gone. Would that person have legal standing?
So now, you're just briefly, because there isn't a perfect scenario. What I can tell you is your buyer broker is going to be one of the heavily weighted scenario. You're now talking about procuring costs. That is one of the elements, but the to and through is going to be, it's not going to have as much of a weight. In procuring costs, there are several things that have to apply. One of them is the sequence of events. Was there a break in the chain of the sequence of events? The fact, was there a buyer broker agreement that was signed? I mean, so there are things that are going to be an element. So they may have claim to, it's possible you have a buyer broker agreement, but the other agent has earned the commission. Right, they're your client, but they got paid the commission. So it's not the class we're going to talk about this. That's a great question, but what the agent, up until that buyer broker agreement being signed, you can talk with them, meet with them. There's nothing that's been in writing to identify that agency.
And she just went in there like 2 times. I've been working with her for 2 months.
The first time was 2 months ago. That's true. If you walked in 2 months ago and you met her, then he did. So anyway. Okay, so this is not where you define agency. This is just making sure that all parties understand agency has been disclosed. Okay? Scroll down. Let's go to the second side. I know it's. Okay, section 7 just talks about disclosures. Okay, this is one of the big conceptions that I got a force on my owner that's calling me right now. asking me why he has to fill out seller's disclosures. Well, did you sign the REPC? Because you contractually said you would. No later than the seller's disclosure deadlines, a written seller property condition disclosure of the property completed and signed date by the seller to be provided. So, Section 7 says these are what the seller needs to disclose. It's not just seller's disclosures, it's any and all of this stuff that they need to provide for you. Okay? If they don't, then they technically could be in breach of the contract. So, they're required to do it. The for sale by owner that's having to address, he thinks because he's never lived in the property, it's an investment property, there he doesn't have to disclose. It doesn't say that if you never lived in the property. We used to have a document that was a non-disclosure, non-occupancy disclosure. It said, hey, I've never lived in the property, therefore I don't have any knowledge about the property. Again, it was used incorrectly. I buy an investment property. I buy it for $100,000. I put $15,000 in it, and now it's worth $150,000. But I had to do plumbing, I had to do drywall. I didn't physically do it, but I had a general contractor take care of it, and I wrote the check. Do I have knowledge about that property?
Yeah.
Of course I do. I've never lived in it, so I don't have to disclose what I've repaired. No, just because you haven't lived in the property doesn't mean you don't have knowledge about the property. This is like who's has seen Fletch Lives? Come on, those of you that have seen it, you don't want to admit it. It's one that all of you get. That's a classic,
You
right?
say Fletch Lives?
Fletch Lives.
Oh,
Absolutely. So,
well,
I can't remember. Aunt May, who's his aunt? It was Aunt's, anyway, whoever the aunt was, he's like, hey, you're the nephew of Aunt somebody. Oh, yeah, yes, I am. Great. How is she doing? Well, she died. Also, she's been better then. Right? That's his response. She's been better. Well, you've inherited her estate. Oh, great. Well, it is a dive, right? If he would have inherited it and immediately just sold it to somebody else, had no knowledge about the property, didn't even know the existence of it, never paid anything, yeah, that's when it was intended to, that non-occupancy disclosure was intended to be used. It was misused so badly that the form was taken off of our forms. We don't even have that available to you anymore as agents. So, just sellers should disclose. It's in their best interest. This is the part that I want to focus on. Okay. Section 8 is talking about three things. Due diligence, financing appraisal, and financing. Three separate areas, but they're really all three are the same on how you handle them. Due diligence, we know what that is. Who does not? Don't raise your hand. Due diligence is your time for your client to inspect the property. Do whatever inspection that they want to do to feel comfortable to move forward with the transaction. And the seller needs to comply with all those. It doesn't say that the buyer has to do all of these inspections. It just says if the buyer would like to do one of these inspections. A radon test, a meth test, a survey, geological test, heating, air conditioning, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. Anything that they want to test on the house, they have the right. Well, I've even had agents come up and I had an agent come up and ask me, who represents a seller, the seller would not allow the buyer to do a meth test.
Oh my goodness.
Because they didn't know if there was any meth there or not. But what they didn't want is to have knowledge of that if there was, now their property is stigmatized. It's not that he's saying, look, I know there's meth there, so I want, no, I don't want to have knowledge of it. It's a fair argument. If I don't have knowledge, then I don't have to worry about it, right? Well, unfortunately, they don't have the right to do that. If they don't allow that buyer to have a test, they're in breach of the contract. Okay, there's consequences to that. Appraisal. Doesn't say that if the home, you're under contract at $200,000, if the home comes and appraises at 195, and if it's subject to the appraisal, doesn't mean the seller has to sell the house for now for 195. Just means what? Both parties have the right to cancel. So the seller has the right to cancel or lower the price. Buyer has the right to cancel or get the lower price. Because a lender is going to loan the home. Well, if it's a cash transaction, yeah, but they would have disclosed that otherwise. Okay. That is true. That's if the seller decides not to lower the price. The buyer has decided to now move forward. So, but they can move forward with the transaction, but now they're going to have to pay that extra $5,000 on top of their. And that's where I was going with this. Is a lender is going to loan off of the lower of the two values, the appraised value or the purchase price. So if they're doing a 95.5, so 5%, I need to come in with a 5% down payment. They're going to give me 95% of whatever's lower, the purchase price or the appraised value. So if it appraises it at 195, let's keep the number simple. Let's just say that it appraised at 200, and we had it under contract for 205. Appraised at 200. So now I've got to come up with, if it's a 95.5, so I've got to come up with $10,000 to be able to get my loan, right? The loan, but the seller's unwilling to drop their price. I still want the house. Okay, I can buy it. No big deal. Well, I need the $10,000 the lender's going to lend me, plus I need the other $5,000 to make up the difference between the purchase price and the appraised value. Does that make sense? Got some blank stares here. So, the offer price is 205, right? Appraisal comes in at 200. So a lender, it's a 95% loan to value. So a down payment is going to be $10,000. Right? That makes sense? So I know that I've got to get a 5% down payment. I have to come up with $10,000 to just be able to get the loan. Well, the lender's not going to loan off 205. They're only going to loan here. I still want the property. Seller is not going to lower the price. That's their right. So we say, you know what? We're still moving forward. I'm basically going to pay more for the house than what the appraiser thinks it's worth. That's okay. We can do that. But the bank's not going to loan money on that. So I've got to come down in my own pocket to make up the difference. So I've got to come up with the $10,000 to get for the loan amount, plus the $5,000 difference between these two numbers. So now my down payment is going to be $15,000, and the bank's still going to loan the 95%, which that's there. I just paid $5,000 more from the house. That make sense? Okay. So the right to cancel, but what's there? Buyer or seller that they're not obligated to perform, they can cancel. I'm going through all the things they can do before we talk about cancellations. Financing, the same thing. If the lender says that they don't qualify, well, there's the ability to be able to cancel, as long as it's done before a deadline.
So can we go back on appraisal?
Sure. How you do notice?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, once I cancel, I'm going to talk about that. Sorry. So since financing is really tied into cancellation at this point, let's go back up to the due diligence. Whether by any of your deadlines, if your client is looking to cancel or make changes, you have to not only give notice by that deadline. No, let me back up. The phone call that I was on while I was late here was talking about this exact issue. Our agent made a misunderstood what they needed to do. They were asking to extend the due diligence deadline for a couple of days, and they thought all they needed to do was give notice of that extension. So they gave notice, the deadline, which was today at 5, or it was yesterday at 5, they sent out before 5 o'clock their deadline a notice to extend the deadline, the due diligence deadline by 2 days. Okay? Well, the seller never signed to respond to that deadline, so they just thought the offer was canceled. They didn't say anything about canceling. All they sent to the seller is, we want to extend our deadline. So they never canceled. Okay? We're talking about two separate things. The buyer's right to cancel or resolve objections. Two separate things that are being discussed. If buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion, by the way, this is a pretty broad definition for your buyer to be able to get out of the contract. Just keep that in mind. That the results of the due diligence are unacceptable, buyer can either, no later than the due diligence deadline referenced in section 24B, cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller, whereupon the earnest money will be deposited and released to the buyer without any further requirement, or no later than the due diligence deadline referenced in section 5, resolve in writing the seller's objections. So, let's say that there's a roof issue. The due diligence deadline is 5 o'clock today. Russ is the listing agent. So I send over to him an addendum that says, hey Russ, the buyer's asking for your seller to fix the roof. I'm going to talk about the language, how to write it, but we want your seller to fix the roof. And I give them until tomorrow at 12 to agree to those terms. No, I'm not going to complicate it. We give them until 5 o'clock today. The deadline's today. I give them until 5 o'clock to sign them. It's 12 o'clock now. We have 5 hours roughly to 5.5 hours to talk about it. He acknowledges that we received the addendum. Client's working on it, thinking about it. Now we're 10 minutes before 5 o'clock. They have still not signed anything back. What are we at risk here? Are we at risk of anything? What? Am I at risk of losing a contract? Not at risk of losing a contract. We're under contract.
Losing that deadline capability.
That's what I'm at risk of.
Only.
I'm at risk of my right to cancel based on my due diligence. So one of two things needs to happen. I need to talk to my client. Hey, Mr. Buyer, if they don't respond back to our addendum by the deadline, do you want to move forward? Well, no, I can't buy the house unless they fix the roof. Okay, well, I can't force them to sign the addendum or respond. So if we don't have it resolved in writing, the addendum signed back that they're agreeing to it, I've got to provide in writing a notice of cancellation. So, Mr. Buyer, if we're not going to hear anything, I've got to get something over to them. What do you want me to do? Well, let's cancel them. Okay, I send a notice of cancellation before the deadline. It doesn't need the seller's signature or anything like that. I'm canceling the contract based on my due diligence. Just that simple. That make sense? The mistake, again, the agent made is they thought that all they needed to do is give notice on this, because this is where the definition, when you're canceling, I don't need the seller's authorization to approve my cancellation. All I have to do is give notice, written notice. That's all I need from the buyer. But if I'm changing the terms of the contract, that requires buyer and seller to agree. By me asking to change the due diligence deadline, I'm changing the terms of the contract, right? So therefore, it's my buyer needs to sign, and the seller needs to assign the agreement. Does that make sense? Okay. So the right to cancel, that's the same thing as there. The appraisal condition, the exact same thing. If I want to cancel, great. I have to provide written notice of cancellation based on the appraisal. Let's just say we've now gone past the due diligence deadline. This is what Russ was wanted me to point out. So we go past our due diligence deadline, we get the appraisal back, and it appraises for $5,000 less. The seller says they are not going to lower the price, so before the deadline, as a buyer, I have the right to cancel based on my appraisal. This is the part that people don't understand. The appraisal says not only that you've got to provide written notice of cancellation, but it also says that you need to provide a copy. Buyer may cancel the REPC. Okay. Buyer may cancel the REPC by providing written notice of cancellation to the seller with a copy of the notice of appraised value. So basically, you've got to provide proof that it didn't appraise. I get these all the time that there's no proof of this happening. And I haven't ever gone to court because that wasn't done, that the buyer's now saying the seller's in default, or the buyer's in default. But the seller, it could happen. We don't want to be the person that's going to create that. So in addition to providing a written notice of cancellation on the appraisal, the part that's different is you also have to provide notice of appraised value. Make sense? Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that? Okay. The financing condition. There's two parts of this in the cancellation. If you cancel by the deadline, by the financing deadline, same thing. All you have to do is, I don't need anything signed by the seller. There's a cancellation document that gives you a box to check. You're either going to check the diligence, you're going to check appraisal, you're going to check the financing condition. Financing 8.3A or 8.3B. Please make sure you check the right box, because
What do you check? Oh,
it's not on this. On this other form I'm talking about, there's going to be a list of reasons why you can cancel. The first one's going to be due diligence, the second one's going to be appraisal, the third one's going to be financing condition 8.3A, or the financing condition 8.3B. There's a difference on what you're canceling. 8.3A says you're canceling before the deadline, on or before the deadline, and all you need to do is check that box, you're done. You provide the knowledge, the notice. 8.3B states different. You've now passed your financing deadline. Let's just say you want to buy the house. Your buyer is interested, you're ready to go, you're excited, you're happy about it, and then your buyer's as happy, as excited they were. They're supposed to sign documents today at 3 o'clock. They're so happy, you know what? They know that they're going to go buy a new truck anyway. They want to just go to the new truck, go to the closing in their new truck. They're at the auto dealership. They're happy, they're excited. They go buy a car. They drive their car to the settlement closing. They sign the paperwork. The next day, the lender does a last verification to make sure that nothing's changed. And now they see they have this loan that has appeared, and now they don't qualify for the home anymore. That is a real scenario that happens, and they screwed themselves out of the loan. So now the lender will not give them the loan. They want to buy the house, but the lender will not give them a loan. Well, of course, the seller, we're going to talk about cancellations. We're going to go that next. It's going to talk about buyer's default. I'm not there yet, but buyer's default. If the buyer's in default, the seller has one of three options to go after the in fact, I should go there first. Let's go there and we'll come back. We're going to come back to this and we'll explain the difference. Default? Yeah. Right there. Okay. So buyer, seller default. Believe it or not, there's three options that exist on either one of these two things. They're just in reverse order. So meaning if the buyer's in default, the seller are going to have these three options available to them. And if the seller's, what's that? Okay. If the seller's in default, then the buyer's going to have one of these three options. So if buyer defaults, the seller may elect one of the following remedies. Cancel the REPC and retain the earnest money or deposits, if applicable, as liquidated damages. So what that's saying is, if the buyer is a default, their earnest money is going to be released to the seller. Okay? First off, this is one of the biggest misconceptions that exists. Agents say, well, heck, if you're in default, all you're going to lose is your $1,000 earnest money. No, that's not what it's saying. Only if the seller chooses to take that as the remedy. That's only option one of three. One of three. If the seller now I'm here to tell you that that is the most often one selected because it's the easiest way to resolve the issue. That doesn't mean that that is the only way, that's the only remedy that the seller has. B, maintain the earnest money deposits if applicable in the trust account, so the earnest money is going to remain with the buyer's brokerage, and the seller sues the buyer for specific performance to enforce the REPC. So they go to the court and they tell the buyer, hey, we want you to buy this house. Okay? Or C, return the earnest money deposits, if applicable, to the buyer and pursue any other remedy of law. So it's $1,000 earnest money that exists. Seller feels that they've been damaged 10 grand. Okay, they may, whatever their reasoning or proof is, okay? We don't want the earnest money. Go ahead and take the earnest money, buyer, because we're coming after you for 10 grand. Now they have to go get their own legal counsel, whatever, they can go ahead and do that. Those are the one of the three remedies. So the same thing goes to the seller. If the seller's in default, this one makes more sense on suing for specific performance. A buyer wants the house, but all of a sudden the seller's decided, we're not moving. I don't care, I'm just not selling the house. Sue me. Okay, so the buyer goes to court, and the courts force the seller to sell the house. That happens very often. Absolutely. If you're under contract, the seller can't just change their mind, we're not moving. They're under contract. Now, this buyer needs to be willing to go through the process to enforce it. So the same remedies still exist. So, knowing that those are the conditions, if the buyer was in default, they went and bought the car, goes back to that, let's go back to the financing. Right there, that's good. We've passed the financing deadline, right? So the buyer, they're at the closing table, they're at the settlement table to signing documents. They want to buy the house. Well, they've passed buyer's right to cancel after the financing appraisal deadline. If after the expiration of the financing appraisal deadline references the buyer fails to obtain the loans, the lender has now said, sorry, we're not going to loan you the money. Then buyer or seller may cancel the REPC by providing written notice or whereupon the earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable, shall be released to the seller without the requirement of further written authorization. In the event of such cancellation, seller agrees to accept as exclusive remedy the earnest money deposits or deposits, if applicable, as liquidated damages. What it means is those last two options for the seller to sue for specific performance or return the earnest money and sue for greater liquidated damages, the seller doesn't have the right to do that anymore. If it's because the lender has said, we can't give them the loan. And think about it. In this case, where they bought the truck, they want to buy the house. So nothing would make them happier is for the seller to go ahead and sue them to perform, but they can't qualify to buy the home. Who's going to, unless somebody else is willing to step in and give the loan, but that's different. It's a different scenario. So that financing condition exists to protect the buyer as well. Say, look, if you can't get financing, even though it's past the deadline, the only risk you now have is your earnest money. It's already been predetermined. You guys know what? Let's see if you taught this one. What is earnest money? What's the definition of earnest money?
Bonus.
Yeah.
Then apparently you didn't also.
Liquidated damages.
What is it?
Liquidated damages.
Okay. Not after. Because when do you present earnest money?
Well, you present a bid, but it's not really liquidated damages until it's in the default.
We're talking about the definition of that's just for the use of it. What's the definition of earnest money?
Consideration.
Okay. You said part of it, liquidated damages. I'm looking, and then you were on the same road. You said after. The definition predetermined liquidated damages. Because when an offer is coming together, the whole purpose of earnest money is if the party doesn't perform, whether it be buyer or seller. So earnest money has value on both sides. If the buyer doesn't perform, if it's a $500 earnest money on I don't care, but $300, even if a $100,000 property, is $500 very much just going to make the seller whole? Probably not. You know, if it's a $500,000 property and it's a $2,000 earnest money, the sellers, that example where I'm talking about, where the sellers moved all their stuff out, they've already packed it all up, it's gotten out of the property, have they spent more than $2,000 to just get out? I'm pretty sure they did. So, predetermined, that earnest money, where it goes back to that first offer, when we want to make our offer as strong as possible, we're determining at the very beginning, hey, if the buyer defaults, I want that earnest money to be enough to make me whole again as a seller. It also applies to the other thing around. If the seller's going to be in default, is the earnest money enough to make sure that the buyer's going to be protected? So that's why the definition is since you're figuring out the earnest money at the very beginning, it's predetermined liquidated damages.
So actually, a huge earnest money could work against the seller.
Absolutely, if they default. That's why it protects both sides. So let's scroll down. Addendas, just choose the addendum that's there, home warranty that's there. Section 10.2. It's talking about an as-is property. Okay? 10 minutes to figure out the rest of this. So, as is means the home is being sold as is. That's where it probably is. Just figured this out. Sorry. I had the same seller that wants information. I was going off the memory. I didn't have the paperwork in front of me to look at. There it is. All right. That's what I thought. Okay.
Use this 2 minutes to explain what you just saw.
Well, what I was going off, this has been driving me crazy for the last 12 hours, and I haven't had the REPC in front of me, or the time to spend time. I had a for-sale by owner that called and wanted to know where the law states that they have to fill this out. I knew offhand the seller's disclosures, but I knew it was also somewhere else here that showed that they had to disclose, and I'm trying to go through each paragraph by memory. I'm like, I know where it is. So anyway, this is where it talks about condition of the property. Seller acknowledges and agrees that in reference to the physical condition of the property, seller agrees to disclose in writing to the buyer any defects of the property known to the seller that materially affect. And it talks about specifically carefully review, complete, and provide to a buyer a written seller property condition disclosure. So, so it's an as-is property. That doesn't mean that our old contracts in 2008, we used to have our contracts gave a warranted property. So the furnace, for example. Furnace works, I'm a seller, I'm not a heating and air guy, but every time I hit the button, hot air comes out, right? So as far as I know, the furnace works. But it's old. It's been there for 10, 15 years at least, but it works every time I use it. So when I go list my property, I'm like, yeah, okay, I know it's in working order. So I am warranting that furnace works. So the buyer goes and does their inspection. They have a heating and air guy come out. The heating guy checks the furnace and sees that there's a cracked combustion chamber. Well, even though the air is coming out, that furnace, that cracked chamber, it's gone. Any minute it's gone. So I gave a warranted home, therefore as a seller, I had to go provide $4,000 to get a brand new furnace fixed because I warranted that it was in good condition. Hated that. So now, this is much better for both sides. Look, I'm selling the home in as-is condition. I'm going to disclose what I know is wrong with the property. I'm required to do that. But if there's something that I don't know is wrong, I'm not going to warrant it that it should be in a better shape. I have no knowledge about it. So, but you don't have the right, you have the right to buy the house in as-is condition if you want, and you also have the right to request that I fix something. I don't have to fix it, but if I know that, if it's a furnace issue, no matter if it's me or anybody else, unless my price is low enough to offset the broken furnace, I'm going to probably have to fix it anyway, but at least it gives a choice. The reason why I point this out is sometimes sellers will say, the buyer requests some things to be repaired. Don't they know this is an as-is home? I don't have to fix that. I'm not fixing that. They bought this in as-is condition. Yes, they did. They did buy it in as-is condition, and they have the right not to purchase your home. Let me ask you, Mr. Seller, if any other buyer walks through the home, are they going to want to have the firms working? If you were the buyer, would you want the firms to be working? You want to be working, wouldn't you? Yes, you would. Okay, so if you don't fix the furnace, not only will this buyer walk, every other buyer that's going to come in, and now that you know that the furnace doesn't work, you've got to disclose that. So would you rather fix the problem or just move on and deal with it later on? So we have to bring that on the table. Okay? Scroll through, go past, walk through, changes, scroll through, sign, scroll through, let's see. Notices. We said that you've got to provide on the due diligence, it said you've got to provide written notice, right? So if I'm canceling, so Russ is the listing agent, it said, trust me, it did say this, it said in buyers, you need to provide written notice to the seller before the deadline of your cancellation, right? So if I send Russ an email, hey Russ, sorry this deal didn't work out, I mean, my clients decided to cancel the transaction based on the due diligence deadline. I provide that check, the cancellation box, which I just send them an email. I just say they're canceled by their due diligence. Have I provided written notice? Seeing no's. Anyone give me a yes? Seeing some yeses? Okay. Well, is it emailed in writing? And did I notify the listing agent?
Yeah.
I'm providing written notice. I've absolutely provided written notice. So have I satisfied everything I need to satisfy? Of course, this is setting up. Most of them should be no, because, or else why would you be talking about this? Okay? This is the part that agents don't know exists. I receive these things all the time, an email, the last minute, or a text. Hey, my client's canceling the transaction. Just want to give you a heads up. Boop, text. There's my written notice. Well, let's talk about notices. Notices, except as provided in section 23, all notices required under the REPC must be in writing, signed by the buyer or seller giving notice, and received by the buyer or seller of their respective agent by no later than the applicable deadline. So the email to Russ saying we're canceling, that didn't meet all the elements. There's nothing signed. So that's when we get the cancellation document. So when you're receiving emails from us all the time where you're looking for you cancel the transaction and we respond back to you, hey, I don't have any proof that you delivered that cancellation by the deadline. So unless it was done in .loop where there's the proof, you got the trail, you have been through your .loop training. It's our online paperless system. It keeps a record of it. Otherwise, if I send that hard copy by email, I need the email history put into .loop that shows by the deadline you delivered that signed cancellation to the party. Otherwise, you haven't met the information. Okay?
Or fax it in, right? So it should show you the date.
Yeah, if you got a fax cover sheet, I can't remember last time I ever sent or received a fax. But yes, as long as you got, hey, this was faxed and it was, sometimes it may not show, unless it has a printout copy of what you faxed to the other party. Yes.
This is the one that, what if you were with the buyer who was canceling based on due diligence, and then you wrote it out, they signed it, you took a picture of it, and recorded it in the email.
That could work. Now just be
You
able to,
want that.
yeah, I mean,
If it was
you've got a copy of that. It's, I mean, what I've done in the past when I'm getting down the wire, you take a picture of it and send it in a text format. That is the worst option, but it's the best worst option you can come up with. So, but yes, then provide a copy of that text, whatever, in
And it does, if the buyer is canceling, it says that it is linked to the seller by that time.
no, it says seller or agent, or the respective agent.
Oh, okay.
So because you're not going to have the seller's contact information. negotiation. They're acting as,
No, I know, I was thinking of that agent had to deliver this, so what if they're slow? So no, okay.
you just have to look at.
And how much effort has to go into assure that they've received it? Like, I sent you an email, it's like, oh, I never, as long as you prove that you sent an email. and it didn't-
That's
it
always the
bounced
question
back.
that are there. I mean, if you've got that proof on a cancellation, I'm generally fine on the email. I'm not going to be too concerned about it. But there is a time when I am overly active. So let's say that Russ and I are in the middle of a negotiation. He represents the seller, I represent the buyer, or vice versa. He represents the buyer, I represent the seller. We're going back and forth, countering on a transaction. And I've now countered his last counter. So it's in his possession. And in the meantime, I receive another offer, and it is substantially better than what we've been going back and forth with. I don't want to deal with this offer anymore. I want to make sure that we cancel. I have the ability to rescind my counteroffer, and we talk about that. This is where I was going with this. Before he accepts that counter, I am going to first provide written proof. Here's my evidence. Send an email real quick. Hey Russ, we're rescinding our offer. We can go back and forth effective immediately. And I'm going to send him a text and hey Russ, just when he picks up the phone, hey, we're rescinding. Before he says anything, I'm just making extra effort to show that it's been done. I'm making the phone call last because I've got the email, the timestamp to show that I already sent it before we actually called. But now I have a written, I got proof, got text, everything there to show that it was rescinded. Because once he accepted that offer, I'm locked in. My seller's locked in, right? But if I can rescind it before he's done, then I've protected my client. So go to acceptance section. That's the last thing we were going to talk about. Go up just a little bit. That way. Oh, that's not. That's it. That's good. I'll just say this: time is of the essence. Your standard deadline is 5 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, unless you change otherwise. I have the right to say, hey, that we're going to make everything 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and change that term. But if nothing is ever identified by a time, just know that of the date, 5 o'clock Standard Time is the general term that is always in the contract. So 5:01, you're past your deadline. Okay? Acceptance. This is what I was trying to get at. This has been also misunderstood. The definition of acceptance. 2 things have to occur for acceptance to occur. You have to, A, seller or buyer, they've signed the counteroffer, addendum, whatever, where it states acceptance, and seller or buyer or their agent has communicated to the other party. That's when acceptance has happened. So, my example with Russ, let's just say his client, they signed it, but they never emailed it to me. He never said, hey Rob, we're accepted. That's why before I hear the communication of that, I've got proof to show that I've rescinded that offer. So even though his client has signed it, he never delivered it to me. We're not accepting. So when dealing with the acceptance, we're going to make sure that we have a clear understanding of when that acceptance occurred. So the same thing, if my client signs something, great, I have a signed copy, but if I never notify the listing agent saying, hey Russ, just want to let you know I've already got the signed document, we got the offer that's been signed back, we're good, we're under contract. I'm not available to send it to you right now, but I'll send it to you tomorrow, but I just wanted you to know they have signed the document, we're under contract. Okay, good. Well then I should have the document that'll say 2 hours ago whenever we signed to make it more valid.
So say he's as good as you and you're crossing the path you're stuck in the contract or
Now you're going. I mean, if it's right, splitting hairs right down the middle. If both sides are really wanted to pursue it, you have to go to court and let them decide. But I've never seen it where it's that indecisive. I mean, I would have to think that an email would say 104 in 12 seconds, and his says 104 in 13 seconds. That 1 second would be the determining factor. I don't know. But,
It would be best if you're having a problem with your scanner to send a quick email saying you have it, so that's your proof that
yeah, I mean, when I hear from agents like, hey, I'm not near anything, well, can you send a copy, take a picture of the page 6 of the REPC and or all of the pages that shows they're accepted and just send a picture to me. That would be helpful. I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult to be able to do it. I mean, even if with technology nowadays, if they sent my offer, of course I don't want to send the full, all the documents to the next agent, but if I pull up the offer and I do a screenshot of each individual page, I could do that and forward it on to the agent. It's laziness is what it really comes down to if we're trying to split hairs. But bottom line, here are your deadlines. Remember, it's a settlement deadline, it's not a closing deadline. These are the dates that you have to have stuff decided upon or just before you move forward by 5 o'clock. Otherwise, you've got to renegotiate a new date.
Okay, I had another question I was reading on there. So if we go back to the, 72 hours after closing, possession, but then you do the pre-settlement walkthrough, how are you gonna,
Okay, so
how
the
are you
walkthrough,
gonna arrange that?
well, the
if they're still in the
walkthrough, what it said is it says 7 days prior to settlement, you're able to do the walkthrough. And even though the walkthrough, you do it, things have not been repaired, doesn't, or even if you don't do the walkthrough, it doesn't void your rights to having the things in the condition of the property the way it's intended to be. So it doesn't waive your rights. So what I would recommend you do is if you're ever going to have the seller make any type of a repair, make sure that you write the offer that they are going to have those items repaired prior to settlement, not prior to closing. Here's the difference. So the roof is supposed to be repaired prior to settlement. I represent the buyer, he represents the seller. And I say, sorry, let me back up. It's supposed to be repaired prior to closing. Well, we're supposed to sign today. It'll fund and record tomorrow. The roof hasn't even started. There is a legal term that exists talking about if there's actions that can imply, you have to go to court to go down that road. Let's just take that element out of it. But as of right now, if his seller, they have until closing to get the roof fixed, right? So at settlement, is his client in default? No. So that means I've got to go sign paperwork. My client needs to go sign paperwork. So do they. They become in default right when it funds and records. That's when they're default, but the transaction is now complete. Well, if I have the terminology that the roof is supposed to be repaired prior to settlement, well, if the roof isn't done, I don't have to go sign paperwork because I'm waiting for the roof to get done. And now I've protected my client a little better so I don't get stuck in that trap. Make sense? It's another little thing. Okay? Sorry, it was kind of a condensed version, but those are the key things that are there. I'm on the 3rd floor. I'm available if I'm not there. Give me my phone call. I'm here to help. So please utilize me. Okay?
Thank you.
Keep on everything. Thanks, guys.